All right, everyone, welcome back to the BFit podcast. I'm your host, Connor Murphy, and I have prepped this for a couple of weeks, but joined here with Chris Irwin. Absolutely honored to have him on the show. I've probably talked more about him and his resume being as big as his biceps before, but Chris, just honestly really happy to have you on here, even though we're virtual, but thanks for joining.
Yeah, brother. Good to see you as always.
It's always funny when I talk about, it's like you always want to start off with something like attention grabbing. And for some reason, what I wanted to do is I wanted to put side-by-side pictures of us both snatching in Cali, Colombia in 2012. So like to have those photos pop up to be like, here's the people giving you fitness advice.
Right. Yeah.
But with everything you've done as far as, when we met, it was in St. Thomas. And it was primarily, a lot of the relationship was CrossFit, was you guys bringing me on to kind of centralize everything CrossFit when I was kind of getting started in the hotels, for us to kind of become a group. And through CrossFit, through fitness, through us training and competing together is how we developed this bond. And I think what I want to talk about more on this is the route that you've been going down the last few years, which is the mental fitness, what your coined term, mental fitness. But before we get into that, kind of how you got to that point, or the importance of that to you.
Well, it started for me right when I got out of the military. And when we met, this was something that was going on for me, but probably wasn't apparent. I kind of developed a very severe anxiety disorder post-military. And it's like a really long and convoluted story, but it's one of these things where you find yourself in a situation, you don't know exactly how you got there. But for me, it stemmed from a feeling of, I guess, sort of guilt to some extent, but I just felt like I had, I've been in the military for 13 years or something like that at that point, and had seen enough, or had been around enough kind of death and I just got to this point where I felt like I didn't understand why I was still around and other guys were not, that I felt were better than me in a lot of ways. Certainly, there wasn't any rhyme or reason to it. And because of that, I just started to kind of, I guess, look for things inside me, I guess physically, that could be the sign of some kind of like deadly disease or something like that, which sounds really weird, but that was just where I found myself. I felt like I kind of developed this disorder of anxiety of like, I'd feel like you feel little things in your body all the time. You feel like a little stabbing pain here or something like that. And most of the time, most people will just gaff it off as nothing because it is. But for me, it ended up being like, ooh, what is that like? And I think I'm sort of wired to be anxious to begin with, but it would be like, that's got to be something. That's got to be some kind of deadly disease or something like that. So I developed this disorder around that. And what I learned later on is if you start doing that, it can snowball to the point where it makes itself worse, essentially. So like if you have some kind of thing in your body like that you feel, and then you're like, oh, that's got to be something, you are ramping up your own limbic system, your amygdala, which is like where your fight or flight response comes from. And it will then in turn sort of exacerbate those symptoms, which makes you more anxious, which makes the symptoms worse. And it can get to the point where it's really bad. So I started developing all these physical symptoms where I would be dizzy all the time. And I'd have like heart palpitations, or my like arms would go numb, like crazy stuff where you think, and then, and then in your mind, you think there's no way that could just be mental. That's gotta be physical, right? There's no way my brain could just do that. And so, yeah, that was kind of, that was my story of like how this all started for me, where I got really interested. Sorry, there's like a little thing on my computer screen. So.
And I mean, there's so much more to that, to where like the listeners, they kind of see, they're like, oh, well, how could that stem? How many different things? What was it like? And from the perspective of from where I was sitting, I remember when you had first told me like, hey, I've got some stuff going on. And it was, it was like, I think it's like a mold toxicity thing, but
Yeah.
for someone being, I mean, for lack of a better term, I mean, one of the hardest motherfuckers I've ever met or been around. And I think as a part of that, it comes down to, oh, well, it couldn't be this. It couldn't be mental because this person has X, Y, Z. So how, I viewed you going through this, it was such an interesting thing. And I'm sure hard on other people that knew you as well to be like, hey, this is like, this person is suffering and there's nothing that I or that anyone can do or know about it. And from knowing a bit, more of your past, it's like, well, how do I help? How do I help or do anything like that? Or, to be able to assist that. So if we can get right into, like progress in that or how, or viewing early signs or people, what advice would you give to someone who is in, kind of a mental area or starts going down that route?
Yeah, it's well, let me kind of back up a little bit and just tell a little bit more about the evolution of things. So anyway, I finally kind of figured out what was going on with myself in that regard because I went to the doctor and they were all like, look, there's nothing wrong with you. I had a bunch of tests done. And eventually I had enough doctors to say, look, we can't find anything really physically wrong with you. And so I eventually kind of came around to the fact that like this was all psychosomatic stuff that was affecting me physically. I mean, and again, it was really bad. Like I would spend my entire day dizzy and like just not able to function at times. So I came across this thing called the Linden Method. I can't remember how I found it, but I was Googling around or something. And I read this guy's story, this guy, Charles Linden, who is, he's a British dude who had spent, I don't know, decades with the same thing. Like I read his story and he wasn't a military guy or anything like that, but he had ramped up his own anxiety to the point where he thought he was dying all the time. And it was the exact same stuff. And reading this of all these crazy things that his body was doing just made me realize, holy cow, like that can happen to somebody and you can have that kind of a reaction. So he's got this thing called the Linden Method. And it's, I'm not going to give away his proprietary secrets here, but I found it helpful and I worked on that stuff and I eventually kind of got my way. So like when we met, that's not to say I didn't have anxiety or I didn't have like kind of like mental health stuff that I was still dealing with, but largely the physical symptoms had kind of dissipated at that point. Then fast forward to 2016 that you mentioned the kind of the mold exposure. That was it was August 14th, 2016, where I was pressure washing my driveway in Georgia. And we had a home that we bought. It was built in 1952, I think. And it had like a concrete driveway that had just whatever that stuff is that builds up over time, right? It was gray and like sort of sludgy and not that bad, but like just needed to be pressure washed. And as you know, I'm somebody who's a little bit fastidious and and likes cleanliness and orderliness. So I spent like 3 hours out there just pressure, not with chemicals or anything, but I just got like a water pressure washer from Home Depot and sprayed all this stuff off. And then we had a attached shed on our house. And I thought, let me go in there and do the walls too, just concrete walls. So I did all this. And then the next day it was like, I went to work. This was when I was at Killcliff and I just couldn't function. Like I couldn't think straight. It just felt so weird. It was like someone had dumped cement into my head. And I remember talking to our marketing director at the time and he was like, you don't look right. Like something, you just seem off. And I'm like, yeah, I don't feel right either. So I went home and I took a sick day and took a nap and it just never went away. It would come and go. I started getting these like crazy lightning bolt sensations in my head and like just massive amounts of pain in the back of my head. And so that kind of like set me back on this path. Now at the time, one of my first thoughts was, this must just be sort of this anxiety stuff rearing its head again. So let me go back to the methods that helped me at first, and they didn't work. And the fact was, I hadn't been thinking all these things. I hadn't been thinking, oh my God, I'm dying. Like, I've got to have all this stuff. So I was like, well, that can't be right. And so that's when I got into this kind of chronic illness world of specifically mold toxicity, which is where I think this came from. That I can really go on for a long time about that and what I think goes on. And that's part of what I do with Rare Sense and kind of talk about these things. But it set me off on this kind of other path of trying to figure out how to treat and cure chronic illness. But I realized even doing that there was a huge mental component to it as well, that even a physical trigger, call it like a mold exposure or a tick bite or whatever, like all these things that lead to these various chronic conditions, a lot of it can be cured through a mental approach, through neural retraining, because what happens is it sort of triggers your body a lot of the same stuff that happens with an anxiety disorder, like a fight or flight amygdala type thing. And then even when your body is rid of whatever the stuff is, whether it's a bacteria or multiple things, I really think that a lot of times we're talking about a trigger, not a single source issue. Once that's out of there, your body's just stuck in this loop. Like your amygdala and your limbic system is stuck in this loop where it's doing the exact same thing. It's constantly kind of in this fight or flight response, and you have to retrain your brain to not do that anymore. So anyway, so I haven't answered your question yet at all about. So that's kind of what answering the question is kind of like going over every single thing I'm doing right now. I decided, 2 years ago, I think it was the end of 2020, where I put out a social media post where I had one of my worst days with this stuff, where I was just like crying my eyes out and I was all red faced and just looked awful. I took a selfie, not because I looked good at all. It wasn't a flattering picture, but I wanted to remember the way I felt at that moment, so that anytime I felt better, I could remember that I'd felt worse at one point. So kind of like buck myself up, right? Like you're better than this right now, because the recovery from this stuff can be very slow and very, like I say, glacial. It can be that slow, and that's frustrating. But you have to remember that you've taken sort of baby steps as you go. Anyway, so I put out this post. It was right before Christmas, where I just contrasted that picture with kind of like, here's how I am now. Not saying that I was like totally better or completely fixed, but it was just I don't know, I wanted to share it with people because I felt like nobody was talking about it. And mental health can be such a private endeavor, and people are scared to talk about it. And especially if you come out of the military, there's kind of this suffer in silence attitude that we then carry forward to our own struggles. And certainly in my case, and I just felt like, okay, if me sharing this, like where I've been in this, where I am, what I'm still going through, and what I've learned, if that can even stop, like, help one person from, whether it's take their own life or just, be in a really bad situation, then that's worth doing. And I should share that. So getting back to your question, it's kind of everything I'm doing, right? Like all of this stuff, it evolved from that to me starting this blog and kind of brand or whatever called Rare Sense, which is all about, as you put it, mind fitness is the term that I use.
I like how you address, the kind of stigma of, the military, the suffer in silence. And I think particularly in the community that you were in and came from, I feel like it's always kind of been there, but really kind of, rearing its ugly head. And especially, I don't know if you saw the email that Jeff had sent out. Jeff is one of our mutual friends who runs the Boston Frogman Swim. And they put out the kind of like itinerary, which a SEAL that you were swimming for the Boston Frogman Swim. Again, I'm jumping a lot of stuff with what Chris does for the Navy SEAL Foundation now, giving back to that community. But, it had a lot of stuff about Bill and Chad in there, and about like kind of the mental side of things and how much they're there for. But I feel like it's so much, it's so polarizing from that community, because it's like, hey, you don't need any of this stuff. The mental side of it you deal with internally. But once it's okay for those people to struggle and to be open about them struggling, it just kind of has that trickle down effect of so many more people being like, hey, it's okay that I'm going through this, or it's okay for me to work on it and for it to be public, to kind of help more people.
Well, yeah, I mean, as you know, I'm not one. I'm really, I try to be very honorable as much as I can be, in the sense that I don't feel it's appropriate for me to talk about my time really in the military in any specifics, right? Like, that's not what I'm trying to do at all. And so because of that, it took me a long time to sort of start talking about this stuff. But I guess what I realized was, everything that I want to talk about is not my time in the military. It's my time as a veteran. It's post-military, right? Like, and my audience, hopefully, is other people like me. And that can be anybody. That could be a veteran, that could be a first responder, that could be, any single mother with 2 kids who's working 2 jobs, right? Who's out there trying to get by. It doesn't really matter. But the point is that I kind of realized, okay, well, but I can really talk about this stuff that I've endured post-military, and with that audience in mind, and hopefully help out anyone that's struggling. And also to say, like, I'm not speaking for every veteran out there, or say, I'm not out here making a statement. It's just me trying to do something that might help other folks open up in some way, shape, or form, right? And I think part of the mentality you're talking about is, if you're in like kind of a high stress situation or job, you get this, we have this general attitude, right? CrossFit's the same way. Just go harder, right? Grind it out. You can, right? Just get up earlier, work harder. Nobody cares, right? And that's not a bad message. Like, people need to hear that at times. There are certainly times for all of us in our lives where we are succumbing to just being lazy, and we just need to get off our ass and get stuff done. But tackling these issues when it came to chronic illness and mental health, and those things are really intertwined too. I mean, one of the problems I see out there is they're separated a lot in sort of mainstream medicine, or whatever you want to call it. And I really think they're intertwined, and it's not really different things. But the point is, like, that didn't work. It wasn't like, I didn't know how to go harder when I was like, I couldn't stand up. I was like so dizzy, right? Or like my head was just so pressurized that I couldn't function. It's like, what is that? I can't grind through this. I mean, you can grind through it, but it wasn't making the situation better, right? That wasn't the answer. And so that's a tough place to be, because it's like, well, hang on, that doesn't work. Like, I can't just go harder. Like, that's not the answer. So that's, again, I think something that needs to be talked about, because we need another message. We need another approach for these types of situations.
When you relate it to CrossFit, something that I think is very relatable, and what I think that Coach Glassman did really well, was he started CrossFit by training some of the most elite people, whether it was professional athletes, whether it was, SWAT, military, and all of that. And then it had this trickle down effect to where, as you and I know, CrossFit is functional movements are for everyone. And you can regain functionality of someone who can no longer sit or stand up by doing CrossFit, but you can also train the world's most elite athletes by doing that. And you have to target the top first. You have to target to say, hey, this program is for you. And we have these professional athletes that are doing it. And then we can get down to, oh yeah, also we can regain functionality from this. Because when you start from the bottom up, say, hey, CrossFit is a program for your grandma and grandpa, then you're going to get these elite athletes being like, I'm not going to do that. Like, what is this? But I think why it's important, and not to leave every stone unturned. Like, we don't have to do that in this situation, but for someone of with the background that you have, with the success that you've had, with the mental strength that you've had through different situations with your career in the military, outside as an entrepreneur, all of these things, if it's okay for you to work on this, I think that trickle down effect is, it starts off a lot higher to open up to a lot more people, as to where if I, there's been, yoga instructors who've been probably pushing the same stuff and ideas that you have, and it's like the real zen and all this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, this shit ain't for me, like me being
Right.
the dumb idiot that I am. But then when you see someone, and again, not to toot your horn, but of that has done and accomplished the things that you have, I think it opens it up, and why it's so powerful coming from you, whether it's a different message than anyone else, but just coming from you. I think that's the important piece, and that's why it's so profound that you're able to make a post like that and make the post to where it opens it up for others.
Yeah, thanks. That is part of the reason that I started doing this too, and that I'm trying to turn it into something that is a holistic approach to mind fitness, is for a bunch of the reasons that you talked about. So when I look at kind of the sort of mental health landscape that's out there right now, there's a bunch of things that didn't work for me, or I think are looked at kind of incorrectly. One of them is, no particular order here, but one of them is, yes, like when I was kind of looking at these things and trying these different systems, the people that were doing it didn't remind me of me. They were, nothing against them, right? But like the kind of culture there was not one that spoke to me at all. So it was like, well, to your point, like, do I really fit in with that group, right? It was like I just couldn't see myself in some of these people. I remember being on like a support group call, and it was like 25. I signed up for this thing, right? There's 25 people were on this call. It's all about kind of neural retraining, and I was the only guy, right? So it was 24 women and me, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it was like, that's hard to relate to. And right. And not a single one of them was in the military, right? We're talking like, there wasn't a shared experience there that made me feel like, okay, this is for me. And so it takes an even bigger leap of faith if that's the case. If you've ever gone into a class, like you're talking about yoga, like I try to do yoga as well because I think it's great, and do a hot yoga class. But when I go into that class every week, it's like the culture there is one that's not exactly comfortable for me, right? Like, or it's and again, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just a little off, like where I would normally choose to be from a cultural perspective. I'm much more comfortable in a CrossFit gym than in a yoga studio. So there's that aspect to it. I think it's also very reactionary. So you talk about kind of like the way CrossFit is designed to be like, we're gonna design things for the top athletes, and then that's got a trickle down effect, right? It's just a question of like the movements don't vary in kind, just in like intensity and weight and all that kind of stuff. Mental health, I feel like, is such a reactionary thing right now, and it's even got a negative connotation when you hear those words, mental health. It's like such a like problems, and so I'm hoping to try to change that idea into this mind fitness idea that is much more proactive, right? That's something you can develop. That's not a problem you have. And I think, look, terminology matters. The way the words we use matter. They make us feel a certain way. And so if something's got kind of a negative connotation, it's hard to flip that around and think about it in a different way. And then the other thing, or one of the other issues, is that it's really siloed too. So as I try to kind of go about my own, whatever you want to call it, mental health, rehabilitation, mind fitness journey, it was like, it was all segmented. So mindfulness is a really big trendy thing right now, and meditation, and that's great. But I feel like it's like one piece of it. It's sort of an adjunct, right? People now, it's like, okay, we're going to work on diet, exercise, recovery, and then we've got some tech stuff. We got biohacks, we have trackables and wearables, and we can test our heart rate variability and things like that. And then we're going to throw some meditation in there. And it's like, that's our kind of our human performance model. And I felt like, well, I think that's sort of reversed for a number of reasons. But when it comes to a really holistic mind fitness approach, meditation and mindfulness is certainly a piece of that, but it's only one piece of it. There's breath work to pull in there as well. And there's a whole development piece too that's almost never talked about. It's never like, well, let's not stay stagnant with just our brain growth in terms of learning things, in terms of skill development, in terms of problem solving. I just think that those things are great. All these things are great. There's a lot of breath work stuff out there. There's a lot of meditation stuff out there, but it's not being combined in a way to really give a full picture of this. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the whole rare sense methodology.
Something that you've helped me out a lot with, and I was very similar, one of those people where it's like, oh, you grind through it or this or that. But I had a lot of self-negative thoughts, and not necessarily one to say a lot of bad things about other people that aren't present. And, if they are, I'm willing to, banter with the best of them. But for myself especially, and especially when things weren't necessarily going my way, when there was mistakes that I'd made, or there were certain things that had happened that had really put me in a spot I never thought I would be in. Something you really helped me out with, and something that we still discuss on probably a weekly basis, is kind of that thought process and how people view themselves on the self-talk, but more so how people think and what thoughts are. And I'd love for you to kind of talk on that, because I think a lot of people can benefit from that, because I think it happens with a lot more people than that are willing to admit.
Yeah, sure. First of all, let me say, I probably should have put this disclaimer, so to speak, out at the beginning, right? I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a doctor. I'm not any of those things. So I have zero qualifications when it comes to credentials, established credentials of psychiatry, psychotherapy, any of these things. And I would never say that I've got those qualifications. I'm simply a sufferer, and I make that very clear in the things I write about. But I think it's important, again, to be a sufferer and talk about these things and share your experiences, because one of the things I've found helpful, again, is the stories of other sufferers, whether it's recovery stories or just even that guy, Charles Linden, like reading his story of like where he was, all the things he experienced, and being like, that's me. Like, I totally get it, was more helpful for me than going into a doctor's office and saying, well, let's talk about your feelings and, let's try to figure out what prescription meds to put you on or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Like, those help people in certain circumstances, but it just, the sufferers' voices are equally as important. Anyway, so getting to thought. This is something I kind of learned probably in the last year or two. A lot of it I take from Sam Harris's stuff. Waking Up is the meditation app that I like the best. I've tried different ones. I really like his. It's very non-woo, right? So sort of like appeals to me. It's just sort of straight on, like what's going on in your mind and what meditation is all about, which is at its core essentially just being able to pay attention to your thoughts and notice what's going on in your own head. That is the practice. It is not trying to control anything, so to speak. It's just sitting with your own mind and noticing what's happening. And you and I have texted back and forth about this, right? You sent me that thing, that meme the other week, which said something like, I'm not my thoughts, I'm the thinker of my thoughts. And that's a nice sentiment to kind of say, like, you don't have to identify with what's in your head. You're just thinking those things. And I took it one step further and said, no, that's not exactly right either. You're not really the thinker of your thoughts. You're the observer of your thoughts. The problem is we think we're the thinker. We think we're the instigator and the source. And you said something like, well, that makes me feel like I'm not in control of my thoughts. And I said, right, you're not. That's the important thing to realize. And that can be a tough thing to understand. But once you understand that, it's really helpful. So to dig into that a little bit, if you spend 30 seconds even just sort of meditating, like observing your thoughts, you will realize that you are not creating what you're thinking at any given moment. That's not to say you can't focus attention. You can actively think about something, but the stream of thoughts that just show up in your head every day, they just show up, and you have no control over what comes up at any given moment. And you can do an exercise to kind of prove this to yourself, right? So if I asked you, like, give me one of your favorite movies, right? Happy Gilmore or whatever, right? I said, okay, well, think about nothing other than the movie Happy Gilmore for the next 24 hours. Like, is there any way that you could do that?
I wouldn't last. I mean, as soon as you say that, it just goes to other things that I'm not supposed to be thinking of. And yeah.
Right. You couldn't do it for an hour. You probably couldn't do it for 20 seconds before something else is just going to show up in your head. And that should prove to you right there that you don't have control of that, right? Like, again, you can sort of actively try to focus on something, but sooner or later your mind drifts and then stuff just starts popping up. The problem is that we identify with those things that pop up as if, to your point, I'm thinking these things. And that's not the way to look at it. The way you need to look at it is as if your mind, your brain is, you can look at it in a couple different ways, but it's like a receiver, like a television or a radio or something like that. It's just a streaming service, right? Those things are like a radio station, and you're not controlling that stuff. You can pay attention to it, or you can ignore it, or you can change the station. And you really have to think of it in that way. And there's a book called The Happiness Trap, which talks a lot about this. It's Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. Really good book, Russ Harris. But there's a bunch of techniques around this that if you're prone to that, if you're prone to really identifying with the stories and the thoughts that show up in your head, there's things you can do to break that, kind of make you realize that what that is, right? Whether it's saying it out loud in a funny voice or noticing that. Right? If you start like taking your thoughts and start just say it, when anything pops in your head, kind of notice it and then think it or say it in like Mickey Mouse's voice or Arnold Schwarzenegger's voice or something, and makes you laugh. It tells you how seriously you need to take that kind of thing. Or just saying, like, instead of saying I'm thinking, right? So to that point about I'm the thinker of my thoughts, instead of saying I'm thinking XYZ, say I notice that I'm having the thought, blah, 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 right? And that creates a separation between whatever that thought is and you, so to speak.
And let's go like a step further than that to where, what thoughts should you be listening to, or how do you start to differentiate once you start noticing, being like, okay, I'm observing my thoughts, and it's like, how do we make the meditation thoughts into action in a positive way?
Well, so again, the meditation is purely the practice of noticing, really. Noticing and focusing. So a lot of meditation, and there's different apps out there. There are different types of meditation. There's like chanting. There's things that you can do. But the idea is like trying to focus your attention, usually on breath, right? So it's like I'm focusing on my breath, and again, sooner or later, I'm trying to focus on just my breathing, and then I'm thinking, oh, what did I do yesterday, and what do I got to do tomorrow? And then you're like, oh gosh, right? And then the idea is trying to get in the habit of noticing that, because sometimes you won't notice it, and you'll spend like 2 minutes where you're just lost in thought until you realize, oh my God, I'm not thinking about my breath. I'm not focusing on my breath at all anymore. I'm just lost in thought. And it's just repeating that over and over and over again. So then at that point, it's trying to bring that practice into daily existence. I mean, doing that practice on a day-to-day basis is really good. And there's some science out there that shows how this can help your brain development too. Doing that once a day, twice a day for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it may be, to be able to kind of work that muscle of that exercise of being able to notice thoughts. But I always say that my intent with meditation is I'm not trying to become a great meditator. there are people that really get into this and go off for months and just do silent retreats and silent reflection by themselves in caves and things like that. And that's fine if that really is your thing. But I think for most people, that's not what they're trying to do. The idea is to become more mindful, more aware in your daily life. My intent with meditation, just like CrossFit, there are people that want to do CrossFit to be great at CrossFit and compete in CrossFit. But for the most part, people do it because they want to live healthier lives and they want to look better and they want to feel better. So to me, that's what all this stuff is about too. It's not so I can like knock my meditation out of the park every day. It's so I can be more mentally fit the rest of the time, the other 23 plus hours of the day. So anyway, getting back to sort of noticing thoughts, the idea ultimately is to understand, like, is this thought helping me in some way, right? So, and if it's not, the quicker you can just let it go. Again, it's not like trying to push it out or get rid of it. It's just, I don't have to spend any energy on that thought anymore. Look, and this is the other thing about mental fitness, is mind fitness, is that it's just like physical fitness. This is something I'm really big on. We have this attitude of, I think this is another problem with the mental health industry, whatever you want to call it, or just the way we think about it. Like it's a yes, no thing. It's like, hey, do you have mental health problems? Or does that person have mental health? Oh, they have mental health problems. And it's like, well, we all have mental health problems. It's just a question of to what extent. So mind fitness is just like physical fitness. We don't say this person's physically fit and this person's not. I mean, we do kind of, but at the end of the day, we realize that it's a spectrum, and you can see it if somebody gets more and more fit. They go from being overweight to being healthy. There's a progress there. There's an evolution and steps along the way. And it's not just a flip of the switch, right?
Nor is there like an end goal. It's not like, oh, no, right, he's all set. No more fitness for him. He is fit.
Right. So that's the other thing, is we sort of think, hey, I had mental health problems and now I don't. And now I'm done. And that to me is just like saying, well, I've worked out enough. Guess I'm done. I'll be physically fit the rest of my life. It's like, no, every day I have to go back in the gym. If I want to maintain a healthy body, healthy physique, I've got to eat right every day. I've got to work out every day, and I can cheat here and there, but it's something that it's a discipline.
Cheat day.
And what's that?
Cheat day, bro.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, we'll talk about that some other time. But mental fitness is the exact same thing, right? And so it's trying to get that in your head as well, that this is something you got to figure out on your own, what your mind fitness routine looks like from a day-to-day basis. What does that constitute? And there's no right answer for any one person, but it's all of these disparate elements that I'm trying to bring together to be like, hey, here's what I think the full picture is. Now you got to sort out for yourself. I need more of this. I need less of this. Again, just like physical fitness, right? You and I don't necessarily need to do the exact same workouts to get to the optimum level or eat exactly the same things. There's people that have slightly different dietary requirements, right? Sort of generally speaking, you should eat these things. You shouldn't eat these things. This movement in general, right? And getting your heart rate up, like that's all good. But then tweaking it it's a very bespoke discipline. And I think the same thing is true with mind fitness.
It's like targeting, scaling, all sorts of stuff depending on.
But it goes back to, it really does go back to, that's why that meditation practice is so critical, because you have to notice what's going on in your own head. Yeah. You have to notice, okay, you know what? I think about this, like even me, look, I'm just as, this is something I have to work on still. And I'm not cured either. This is really important to me, is to say, I'm not some guru that's like, I figured it all out. Check me out. Like look at how awesome I am. Right. My point is like, I'm just like everybody else, still in this and trying to get better and working on it every day. There's no cure, so to speak. Just like there's no cure for physical fitness. That's not the way to think about it. So even going into this podcast, right? These kinds of things don't make me necessarily all that comfortable. I'm a little nervous. I'm like, ooh, am I going to say the wrong thing or something like that? But those are all just thoughts. That's all just garbage in my head. And before I start an interview like this or anything else, I have to think to myself, okay, what's going on in my head right now? And is it useful? Is this going to help me in some way? And if it's not, then I just don't need to spend any time with that thought. And that's the discipline.
I think, I mean, obviously that stuff is powerful and stuff that's helped me out a lot. And I think is a good like step process for someone who has just either completely ignored it, or it's like a good, you know, if we relate it to fitness, like a good on-ramp or fundamentals to be like, hey, pay attention, or just take a step back from meditation. That was my first exposure to meditation was from a guy, Keith Stern at Reebok. And he was like, when you drink your coffee in the morning, spend 10 minutes, doesn't matter how much time, but all I want you to think about is just the coffee. It's like when you're drinking it, as you're consuming it, what it feels like, but it only can be the coffee. And realize that your mind will drift off, and realize that when your mind drifts off, that's part of it. Just kind of direct it to come back to it and see how long it takes you. And the more I did that, the better I got at not having thoughts just drift off. I was able to just focus on one thing. And that was the first piece of it. And he had called it for me like a coffee meditation. And sometimes it would be 90 seconds. Sometimes it would like 12 and a half to 15 minutes would go by. And I was like, wow, that was a much better thing about focusing. But and that was like my first exposure. So I think what like the info that you gave there is very good for people to realize, okay, here's something I can start. If you could narrow it down to 3 things for people to start working on, working on their mental fitness, working on, kind of this, the rare sense, which I obviously think is incredible as a play on like the common sense thing, which,
right,
especially when it relates to this topic is, key piece of it. But what if are there 2 other things, or even like 3 things, if it's like, hey, here are some things that you can do right now to work on this, or things that have helped you, but simple things, palpable for someone to just start right away?
Well, first of all, I would recommend find a meditation app that you like. It does help to get some instruction, so to speak. I mean, anybody can meditate with just a timer. You could just set your timer on your phone for 10 minutes. But if you've never done it before, it does help to have some kind of guidance of how to do it, so to speak. Just someone who's sort of like guiding you through it. Again, I really like the Waking Up Sam Harris app. I think it's like, I don't know what it is at this point. It is a subscription service, but he's got an intro course in there that I think is like 20 or 30 lessons. And they're 10 minutes. So it's not a big time commitment, but just doing something like that. There's probably free resources out there too. I'm sure you could find like YouTube videos that take you through it, but I just like that there's a little bit of structure. There's other ones, there's Headspace, and there's a bunch of other meditation apps. So I think that's a really simple one. I like to adopt, so you talked about basically presence there, that coffee meditation idea. And that's sort of the focus that is about presence, and the idea that all that exists at any time is the current moment. That's it. Anything that happened in the past no longer exists. Anything that is going to happen in the future does not exist. The only thing that exists is right now. And yet we don't spend any time right now for the most part. We spend our time thinking about the past or worrying about the future, generally speaking, right? We're sort of like lost in like, what did I do yesterday or anything? And so we miss the moment. And that's kind of what you're talking about with the coffee stuff. So there's a daily morning practice that I really like to do. I call it gratitude and intent. And the idea is starting to notice what you're thinking first thing in the morning. Like, what are those thoughts that pop up first thing in the morning? And you mentioned negative and positive. Again, the better way to think about it is this helpful or useful or not? It's not really negative or positive. It's just because a quote unquote negative thought sometimes can be helpful. You can have a negative thought that says, man, I'm out of shape. I need to get in the gym. if that then spurns you to get into the gym and start working out, well, that was a helpful thought. That was negative, right? But it was helpful. So you really need to start couching it in those terms. But one of the things that I started doing was first thing in the morning, doing a statement of gratitude and a statement of intent. So going back to backwards thinking, forwards thinking, you're writing down, and really write it down, whether it's on your phone. What I like to do is like a yellow sticky, right? Take a Sharpie and write down statement of gratitude, something you're thankful for. It can be the simplest thing in the world. It can just be, hey, I'm thankful I woke up this morning. Does not need to be profound. But the idea is that thought is something that's essentially looking backwards, right? That is, you're thankful for something that happened. And then a statement of intent for the day, which is like, today I intend to blah, 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 whatever it may be. Again, it can be super simple. But that's a forward-looking thought. And the idea is to then use those statements throughout the day to try to replace something that's unhelpful, looking backwards and forwards. So if you've got essentially, and I usually think of it as like, backwards thinking is a lot of sort of guilt and regret and depression. And forward thinking is a lot of fear and anxiety. And that's really where I went both ways, but it's, for me, ended up being largely like anxiety, just worrying about everything, like thinking things were going to kill me. And so, just really hyper-vigilant craziness. And I don't use that term lightly, but I can say that about myself, right? Like, so, like things that were just like, when I think about it, it's crazy. Anyway, so that's kind of the flavor of those things. But the idea is like, if you have those statements, then you're trying to, at every moment throughout the day where you start going down those rabbit holes, replacing that with those thoughts. So if you can put them in a place where you see them all day, it'll really help you. If you sit at a desk, stick them on your desk or on your computer screen, left and right, this way, this way. And it's like just trying to get in that habit of, hey, I'm thinking something unhelpful about the past. Let me go back to my statement of gratitude. And I'm starting to worry about something stupid in the future that's probably not going to happen. Let me go back to my statement of intent. That's a really simple practice that, again, doesn't take a lot of time. I used to be one of these people that get up first thing in the morning, run out the door, go to the gym. And a lot of people do that, and some people need to do that. I've kind of shifted things around where I try to spend my first couple moments of the day like in some kind of meditative state, just chill, like get some coffee, do that, and then just sit there for like 5 to 10 minutes. It doesn't even need to be meditation, so to speak. It can be kind of like meditation light, where I'm just trying to notice, like, how do I feel today? Like what's just kind of like percolating at the surface? Because if you don't do that, you just kind of like don't check in with yourself first thing in the morning. So I think that's a really good thing to do. And then doing it on the flip side too, like right before you go to bed, spending like 5 or 10 minutes doing kind of the same. It's almost like setting yourself up for sleep. And it's not, you don't have to like, it's not like a big intricate process. It's just spending some moments where you don't have to be doing all the time. You can just be being. And I think I've got an article about that called Humans Being, that I think is really important.
Your website, www.raresense.com.
Mm-hmm.
How often are you putting stuff out there?
Well, so the website it started with the blog. I wrote, where that's all kind of came from, again, was I put a couple things out on social media. I did some just sort of videos talking about my own experience and what I thought about this stuff. And I got a lot of good response from it. And people reaching out to me, like DMing me and saying, oh, dude, I know exactly what you're talking about. And again, it was enough for me to think, okay, this is helping some people, and that's my intent. So let me take it one step further. I didn't really know how to do that. But I was flying. I can't remember where I was flying. I was on a flight, and the guy, like across from me, up a couple rows, was watching the movie Logan on his computer or on the screen on the back of the chair. and I think people know that movie, but it's the kind of the last Wolverine movie with Hugh Jackman where he's old and dying. And it's like this really, it's a heavy movie. And I'd seen it before, but I thought, oh, that's a good movie. Let me watch that. So I started watching it, and it struck me in a way that it hadn't before, where I was just like I felt like I'm this dude from a sort of like former military perspective. It's like my body's kind of broken down a little bit. Mine's not where it used to be. Like just everything about the character felt, and this was right when like Afghanistan was ending too. So there was like kind of a lot of emotion wrapped up in it. And I just got so emotional watching this movie, thinking like identifying so strongly with the character. So I just wrote out a thing about it. I was just writing a Word document, just wanted to get my thoughts down. And I was like, what do I do with this? But I felt like it needed to be said. So I had a Substack subscription. People that don't know I don't know if people know Substack, but Substack is like independent writers. They have their own subscription services. So it's like they just put out content on a weekly or whatever basis, and people subscribe to it, and then it becomes a paid model. But a lot of people out there, especially famous writers, have taken to this model and do very, very well on it. Like there's people that their full-time income is from Substack. So I was like, okay, well that's cool, because it's a post like a blog, but then it'll email it to people too. So I just wrote this thing on Substack. I put it out there and edited it. And gosh, I don't even know how I got it to people to start. It's not like I had any subscribers. I think I just put it on social media or something. And again, I got a really good response from that. Just people were like, hey, you write more like this. And so that was encouraging. So I was like, well, let me turn this into something. So that's kind of where the Rare Sense came from. I turned to that blog became Rare Sense. And then I just built off of that. So the website has a link to that blog, that Substack, for people to subscribe. I've got a bunch of resources on there, be it books that I've read that I think are really helpful from a mental health, mind fitness perspective. There's a lot of puzzles and games on there too, because I think that to me is a piece of mind fitness that isn't talked about, like trying to develop your mind. A lot of us just get to a point in life where we just don't learn anything anymore. We're like, well, school's over. I guess I just don't learn anymore. And I think that's a really bad place to be. There's links to various programs that I've done, neural retraining programs, meditation apps, things like that. Again, just trying to bring all these disparate elements together, and also say, like, I didn't invent a lot of this stuff. When I talk, there's neural retraining on there that's like, I'm not going to take credit for their methods, and I'm not going to tell people. It's like, if you want to go do those programs, go do them. Like I don't have any relationship with any of these. Nothing's invasive in the sense that I'm not recommending drugs or treatments or anything like that. It's all stuff that people can do on their own. And that's kind of the idea, right? Is that I'm trying to empower people to work on their own mind fitness the way they can work on their own physical fitness. Because I think that's another piece of mental health in general out there right now, is that it's sort of, a lot of it is like, you need to go see a doctor, right? Like it'd be like saying you can't get physically fit unless you have a personal trainer. And don't get me wrong, if you need to see a doctor or a psychiatrist or whatever, like, go do that, right? Yeah. Like, there's people that need to do that. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that all of us can do things on our own to improve. We can take charge of our own mind fitness and work on these things, and realize that we have the power to work on these things on our own. And so, yeah, so there's that stuff on the website. What else is on there? It's still it's a work in progress, and it will be for a long time, but I'm hoping to kind of just keep creating content that'll bring all these things together.
Well, I know you know, speaking from personal experience, you've helped me out with a lot of different stuff. I mean, over the years, the list can go on, but especially with, you know, recently and this type of thing, to where I was in the same boat, you know, coming out of the military. It was like, you're fine. You don't discuss this. You have to, you know, set the role for other people. You have to, you know, you don't talk about this. And for a long time, you know, I kind of had this kind of like carefree lifestyle to where I didn't have any focus on like positive or negative for mental fitness. It was just kind of, hey, whatever it is, until, you know, you kind of got to grow up at some point in time. And that's when, you know, I start imagining things of the future, or settling down, or thinking about things that had happened in my past, thinking about that type of stuff, to where it's like, it all kind of created this dark hole for me, to where that, you know, I still remember a conversation we had when I was back down in St. Thomas for the second time. We sat on the phone for a bit, and it was really that thought process. Like these thoughts aren't, like, they're not true. Like they're just thoughts. Like some of them may be the things that have happened, but you know, I was just thinking so negatively about my past and about things that have happened, that like I kind of like created this thought to where, like, hey, if I'm thinking this stuff, it must be true. And as soon as I could kind of yield to that and just kind of watch them go by and be like, yeah, I'm not going to spend much time on that. It's not helpful. This thought isn't going to help me. I'm not going to say, hey, Connor, you're a piece of shit. And it's like, all right, well, great. It's like, you know, going to go be a piece of shit today. And it was like, you know, maybe focus on, hey, here's something that you're doing really well. Hey, let's spend some time on that. Let's spend some time focusing on this, or here's how you're helping others, or that side of things. So from even just the blogs that, you know, as you know, I read all the content and all the stuff you put out, and a big piece of having you on the podcast too is not just to, you know, selfishly get to hang out with you for a little bit, but
always good
to shed some light on this for other people who, like you said, you don't need to be in a dark place to see the benefits from this. You'd be like, hey, everything is great. It's like, well, great. Well, here's some stuff to either make it better or to continue on this in case anything does happen, because you're never just cured, or you're never just mentally fit. Just like you're never like, hey, I'm fit enough. That'd be great. That'd be great till I get to a certain point and be like,
yeah,
well, yep, here's me the rest of my life. Like, sure, I could spend some time on some other shit, but yeah, I mean, I'm just super grateful for all of that stuff, and I hope that other people get to experience what I have through your learnings. And like you said, it's not like you went to get a PhD to do this. It's like it's clinical trials from you. It's someone who I obviously respect from more ways than one, not just because of, you know, another lesson you taught me is, you know, your past job shouldn't be why people respect you. People should respect you for who you are in this current moment. And just through that, just a lot of just incredible lessons. So I'm hoping that we can push some more people to that, to help more people and bring, shed a little bit more light on everything that you're doing from, I mean, even from this perspective, but also as your job currently still head of partnerships, or what's
that's a piece of it. So I'm the communications director for the foundation. Yeah. Navy SEAL Foundation.
Communications director for the Navy SEAL Foundation. I know any of the listeners have heard a lot of the stuff we do to give back to the Navy SEAL Foundation, the Boston Frogman Swim, that a group of us, I think there's like 80 swimmers this year, but I've always, you know, tried to participate in to be able to, you know, to give back to that community, and really all military communities. But just, you know, awesome in anything that we can do to highlight everything you're doing to give back, to help.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And also, let me be clear too. Everything all the rare sense stuff that I do, none of that is kind of in my official role at the foundation, right? That's completely separate. So I have that role as the communications director for the foundation. I do manage partnerships as well. Mm-hmm. But the rare sense stuff that I do is completely independent, right? That's my own personal stuff. And I'm very clear about that, again, on the website, that I'm not, anything I say there or on my blog is not representative of any organization that I work for now or have worked for. And again, it's not medical advice either, right? Like I said, we have to empower people to work through these things on their own, and together too. I should say, this is important. There's the second article I wrote on the Rare Sense blog was kind of a manifesto about like what this is, this whole concept, and how I'm trying to put it together. And I'm still tweaking that too. I go back and I'm like, oh, that's not exactly right. Let me like fix it a little bit here and there. So it's a work in progress. But I stayed in there that I think one of the things is we're in this together. We have this mentality now. One of the problems that I think we're all encountering when it comes to mind fitness is it's self-oriented. So much of this, because the stuff happens in our own head, but we get too self-oriented, and like that term self-care that is so prevalent now and popular, I think is a little bit of a misnomer, because it's like we spend so much time in isolation now, and we've been so isolated for years, much more so than in the past because of coronavirus and these other things. And now it's like the solution is like more time by ourselves. Like I need to retreat to myself again. And I think that that's not necessarily the right answer. Like you need to work on these things, but we have to work on them together. Sharing things is important. Being open about things is important. I think, again, that's what I'm trying to do. And to some extent is like talk about these struggles. We have to be willing to the extent we're comfortable. And that's not to say you don't have to be on social media, like professing your problems to the world, but getting together with people is super important. And I've just found sometimes when I'm in my darkest moments, the best thing I can do is like get out and be with other people, not retreat to my room and be by myself. I just think it's really critical. So I put in there's this quote from Gladiator, which is one of my favorite flicks, where I don't know if it's the first time that they're in the Coliseum and Russell Crowe's character, right, Maximus, is like, hey, have any of you guys ever been in the army? And there's a couple of guys like, yeah, I served with you at Vintabona or whatever. And he's like, whatever comes out of these doors, if we work together, we have a better chance of survival if we work together. Like if we stay together, we survive. And I love that quote because I think it's really important, right? Like, we stand a better chance if we work together. And that applies to a whole bunch of stuff, even outside of mental health. But
yeah, I mean, what was it? Bill Gates that said, no, not Bill Gates. Steve Jobs said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah, good.
I don't know who said it, some rich white guy. But what I wanted to end with, and something I always respect about you too, this is aside from what I wanted to end with, is that you don't leave a lot of gray area, that there's not a lot of room for assumptions. I've kind of, allow that in to where if there's, something to where you're like, I'm not this is this is this. It's like, you don't ever want to like take credit where it's not due. And it's something that I respect a ton. But one thing that you've helped me decide, one thing that you've helped me with, and what I want you to, if you know it off the top of your head, is when we talked about a mantra, and it's helped me kind of refocus. And maybe I don't have it written out on my desk, but when I revisit that, it's kind of like, hey, is this still your focus? Is this still who you want to be? And it's really cool because I can change it if I want. But then most of the time when I go back to it, I'm like, oh, here's kind of the main focus. So do you know your mantra off the top of your head?
Oh gosh, you're going to put me on the spot. I don't actually. It's been a while since I've looked at it. So you're calling me out that I need to spend some more time with that.
Or do you have it on your computer?
I have it on my computer. Yeah, I have it on my website. And I need to. It's actually a good point. Like I need to do a better job of getting back to that. Again, I'm not a perfect case study here, right? These are the things that I need to do. And it's also something that, and maybe I should use the term mantra. I use personal mission. That's the term I use. And it's like to think well, act honorably, laugh, give back, and there's something else in there. So that's how great I am at memorizing my own personal mission, right?
There's something about not taking yourself too seriously.
Yeah, right. And there's different ways to go about that. I think Simon Sinek has a way that he does this as well, which is a completely different method in terms of establishing. But the whole idea is, if you spend a lot of time in a job, whether it's the military or whatever it may be, your identity and your mission, so to speak, gets really tied to that job. So that whenever that may end, a lot of people then feel like they lack purpose, like they lack a mission. I think, I felt this way. And it stems from this feeling like the job gave you purpose, like that gave you a mission. And the reality is that's not true. If you step back, what you did was you found a job that aligned with your personal mission. You hadn't written it out. You didn't like codify it.
Yeah.
But you went out and found something that aligned with your values. And so if you step back and realize that, you can then take your values and turn them into your own personal mission that then can help guide you in whatever else you do in life. And that's kind of the intent there. And I have I've got like a spreadsheet. There's an article that I wrote on the blog about kind of how to do that from my perspective, or a way to do it.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of a spreadsheet, although I think I had that tied to a different website. I need to get that up on the Rare Sense site so people can download it. Like, it's a free resource, right? I'm not trying to charge people money for that stuff. But yeah, you bring up a good point, man. I gotta do a better job of memorizing my own personal mission statement. So I've slacked off in that regard.
Well, I think that'll just
way to call me out. Thanks, buddy.
I think hopefully that'll just draw more people to the website to be like, I wonder what this shit is.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, I don't want to spend too much, more of your time on here. I know as soon as we get like longer than an hour podcast, people will just from the the start, they see it and they're like, oh, I really got to cut out some time here. But obviously love having you on here. Are you coming to Boston anytime soon? Are you coming for the swim?
I don't think so. No, we'll see.
Well,
I will always tell you if I'm coming to Boston. You know that.
Yes. Yeah. I was just, if you were coming from the swim, I know that was coming up, and but regardless, we can get you in here in person, and I'm just, like I said before, grateful for the stuff that you've done. That, I mean, again, for free on your site that you've put out, that it's very much so helped me out, and hope that other people we can see and see the same things from you. Putting yourself out there putting yourself out there that you're not perfect, and that you're not impervious to anything with the mental fitness. So I think it takes balls to do that, obviously, and I'm sure it's not an easy thing for you to do. So again, very grateful, and very grateful for your time to come on here and chat with me today. Yeah,
brother, always good to talk to you. Even in a very public setting like this. So good to chat, dude.
Yeah. And any other plugs to follow Chris at this Chris Irwin on Instagram, the website www.raresense.com. Anything else that you think for people to find you?
No, that's it. Social media, anywhere pretty much. It's this Chris Irwin, and then the website, and that has a link to the Substack, which is raresense.substack.com. And people can subscribe there. It's a monthly newsletter, just so people know. It's not, I spend a lot of time on those articles, and I don't have a ton of free time, so I have to parse that out as best I can. But it's a monthly newsletter. There's no cost for it currently, so please sign up, and you'll get that your inbox first of every month.
And I love it. I'm obviously signed up for it, but I mean, pretty much anything you could be like, hey, you got to buy this product. I eat 3 every day to help keep me strong. I'm like, I'm in. Thanks again, brother. We'll chat again soon. And yeah, that's all I got.
Awesome. Thanks, brother.
All right, man.